Hello and welcome back to episode 15 of That Garden Life. If you've been with me so far, you'll know that That Garden Life was a series I did on this channel to show our garden transformation. And in last week's episode, in episode 14, I showed you how we finished the front garden finally, and we revealed the front gate and how we ended up staining the wood in the front garden to make it all grey. If you took a few minutes to leave a comment under the video, thank you so much for that. I really enjoyed reading what you thought of how the front garden looks. Pleased to see that you also like it as much as we do. In the last episode, I promised you I would make a video where I will talk you through our process for choosing the plants that we ended up planting in our garden. And it was quite a big endeavor. Obviously, we have no experience with this, but we took it very, very seriously and have a, looking back, a process that we went through to make sure that the plants that we chose were obviously fit for the conditions that we have in our garden, that also look good, and that overall we're happy with the final product. This video will be structured in 3 chapters. The first chapter will talk about the resources that we used. The second chapter will talk about the actual process that we went through. And then the third chapter will be telling you any tips or advice that we have if we were to do this all over again. So Garrett, we really started from a blank slate, didn't we, in terms of thinking about this garden. So what resources did you use to start learning about this topic and collecting your thoughts about what we wanted to do?
The first source we used was a book called What Plant Where, which is by the Royal Horticultural Society. And what's great about this book is it's broken down into various chapters. Once you figure out what your soil type is, for us it was clay, and when you figure out what kind of sun you get, there'll be an entire section dedicated to shady clay soils, in which they give you, in theory at least, all the plants that will fit that. What's also good about this book is it's also broken down into styles. So if you want to just go for a style and then you want to add the soil or the kind of sun you have, or if there's like tricky spots, it has a whole chapter on tricky spots. So what's great about this book is it kind of gives you, very quickly whittles down what kind of plants will work where.
So that book is a physical book that we purchased on Amazon. So we decided to buy the book and just have it as a resource in the house. Is that right?
That's right, because I imagine we'll be turning back to that in the future.
Even though all of this information is available online, it's nice to have a physical book in the house that you can turn to and consult whenever you need advice. What other resources, I suppose online resources, did we use to figure out what we wanted to do with the garden?
Again, the Royal Horticultural Society has a website that if you just type in the name of the plant, so once you know the plant, you type in the name of the plant, it'll tell you all the characteristics of that plant, how it grows, how to plant it, tips, things to look out for, and how it grows in terms of size. That kind of helps you see where, in terms of placement, which we'll get to later in the segment, but it kind of helps you to kind of visualize how big is this plant going to get. So that's a great source. The other 2 sources are actually companies that are, online, quite popular plant dealers online that do what are called ready-made borders. And here, again, they will say like border shade or border for desert look or border for English garden. And what they do is they give you kind of these pre-designed borders and what kind of plants go in there. Now, they don't always give you all the information, so you need to triangulate with other sources. But what they will do most of the time is give you either an architectural blueprint so you can see how plants should be in relation to each other, or they'll give you the names of the plants without the blueprints. So if you go to these 2 sites and you kind of cross-reference each other, plus this book that we had, we were able to kind of see what kind of groupings of plants worked well together and how they worked well together in terms of positioning. Those 2 sites is one called Crocus. Hit their ready-made borders, you'll get about 20 of them. The other one, I can't remember now, but we'll put a link down below. That's like Borders for Dummies. You put in the measurements of the allotment that you need. They will generate a plan for you, and when they send you the plants, they have a sheet that you put down on the dirt, and you literally plant where they say like plant 1 goes in slot A, and it does it all for you. So again, when we use the Crocus one, we could figure out the number of plants we need from them, how it would look, and what plants from that site, and then we could literally pollinate with our book. It was great.
Yeah, so it's definitely a very DIY approach to thinking about the border. So this concept of the space that you have is called a border. And it's not just one site or one book that's going to give you the answers. You really need to do a bit of research and use multiple sites to get the look and the plan that you want. And of course, another resource was just plain old Google search for tricky spots that we, so for example, had to look for a tall screen plant to hide ugly fence, literally put in that and you get a number of options that you could look into, and then you just start reading more about the plants and seeing what they look like and if you like it. Alright, so now that we covered the resources that we used, I want to talk you through the step-by-step process that we went through. Now, the first and most important step that you want to do is to figure out what conditions you have in your garden. And by conditions, I'm really referring to soil and sun. This is because, while you might want a Japanese maple tree inspired garden, it might just not be possible for what you're working with. The key is to ensure that the plants that you end up planting thrive in that environment. So determining the sun conditions and the soil conditions you're working with is really important. The second step that we went through was really defining what kind of garden we were looking to create. And this is important, you want to have a bit of a think of it, an inspiration of the kinds of styles, looks and feels that you want for your garden. So for example, for us, we really were attracted to the concept of an English garden, and we chose a color palette. For the front garden we have, I believe, a yellow and purple color theme, and obviously in the back there's a woodland garden which is primarily just green and lush. For this step you want to spend some time looking for inspiration and photos and really see what you are attracted to, whether it's more geometrical shapes, whether you like the more wild look or the more floral look. It's really up to you. It's just defining and getting a sense of what your style is and what your preferences are. Alright, the third step is really to start making a plan of the plants that you are working with. The way to start this list is to get a sense of the plants that thrive in the environment that you have. And you can do this in a number of ways, but as I mentioned before, you can start by looking at this book, the Royal Horticultural Society book. You can also start looking at different websites and start researching the plants, or you could look at websites such as these two websites that I'm going to put on the screen now, which do what's called pre-made or pre-arranged borders, just to get a sense of how they are arranging the plants in a certain formation in a certain space. So here now from a conversation between my husband and I, where we talk a little bit about this process because he ended up doing a lot of the research for this.
I Googled each plant and kind of read up on them. So I wanted some ground cover, and I wanted some ground cover that would go around paving stones that we have. One plant that we bought and that we didn't use turned out to be really invasive, so I didn't want it to start crowding out and killing all the other plants. So I isolated that somewhere else. But most of the plants I got right because I did a lot of homework and made sure that they were right for the spot, they would deal well with the sun, and that they would cohabitate with the other plants. And that's another thing. Some plants can be really greedy, and you have to kind of make sure you're not putting weak plants next to really hardy plants.
So let's talk a little bit about numbers here. How do you know how many plants you need? To determine the number of plants that we ended up with, I think we had 279 plants in the end, as I showed you in the video here where we plant them in the garden. The way we determined that number was by estimating it with the border plans that we had created. So we used these websites for inspiration to look at the pre-made borders. If that border used 15 plants and we used that border to fill up the space 3 times, then we simply just multiply that 15 by 3. This is not an exact science, and truly it will only be in spring next year that we see whether we are missing a few spots. We have some bold spots here and there. We might need to fill in some gaps or whatnot, but this is how we estimated it. Now, just to say, we didn't exactly copy and paste those arrangements. There were places where we added stuff in. There were plants we couldn't get, so we had to replace them. So we did need to do quite a bit of research to create the perfect border for our space in terms of size, in terms of considerations of any things we needed to hide, like fences, things like that. So there's a little bit of play around that you have to do with that list, but it's a great starting point to just get you started, get a plan, start making a list of plants and get going with your process. All right, now let's talk about buying the plants. In terms of the fourth step of buying the plants, what can we say about that?
Well, I can say that you can find anything you want to buy on the internet. So we actually bought from 3 different places, 2 places that were on the internet that sent them within like 24 hours of purchase. Those were a bit more expensive, obviously. And then we bought most of them through Johnson's, which luckily for us, our landscaper didn't mark them up. So we paid basically what he would have paid for them if he was to buy them himself with his license.
And when we bought these plants, what sort of package instructions do they come with? Is it fairly straightforward? What can you tell people about buying plants online?
Well, the online plants that we didn't buy through the wholesaler was useless. In fact, some plants came with no label at all, and we had to figure them out. See the last episode. Well, the ones like Crocus, when you buy them, they come with like sheets about everything you need to know about the plant, how you care for the plant, suggestions for planting that plant, and they come with a guarantee. So unlike Johnson, where you can't return a plant, and they don't guarantee their plants, these other online dealers, and you pay for it, obviously, guarantee their plants for, I think, up to a year.
So what does a guarantee for a plant mean?
If the plant dies, if you plant it properly and you can demonstrate that you've done everything to their care instructions and it dies, they'll send you a new plant.
That's interesting.
It turns out that about 1/5 of your budget should be towards plants. Wouldn't you say that that's right?
Yeah.
That plants are more expensive than you think. And if you get mature plants, like we did with the box hedges, because we wanted them to be kind of fully grown, you will pay for that, because obviously whoever you buy from, the nursery you buy from, has painstakingly taken care of them for years to sell you them at that height. That goes with trees and other things that you may get that are a bit more mature.
All right, what's the final step? All right, the final step is, of course, to plant the plants. And for this, you might want to watch episode 12 of That Garden Life, where I show you the step-by-step process of actually planting all of those plants that we got. It's a process that you need to pay a lot of attention to before you plant, because once you do it, it's a bit tricky to change your mind. When you do this, the most important consideration you need to think about is the amount of space that the plants need around them and the arrangement. To do this, we consulted the Royal Horticultural Society website to look at the dimensions around the plant. The best way to do it is to just pre-arrange the plants where you want to put them in. That gives you an idea of the arrangement. You can move things around a little bit before they're all set in stone. And we did this for all of our gardens. And it's interesting, we did it one day and then we left a little bit of time, we came back to it, we changed our mind a little bit. So you do need to give a bit of time and consideration to the space, to the arrangement, and you should do this over a couple of days until you're perfectly happy with the arrangement. In terms of planting, can you do it yourself? Absolutely. I mean, it's as simple as digging a hole as deep as the root of the plant and then just sticking it in and covering it with soil. It helps if you've got company, if you have someone that helps you do it. We had the team to help us plant them, and I show you that in episode 12. It just made the whole job go a lot easier. It does take a toll on your back and your thighs because you have to do lots of squats throughout the day, but I think overall it can be a really fun experience to see your garden come to life. Alright, for the last chapter of the video, allow us to give you some tips and advice for planting your garden.
So it seems to be like groups of 3s, and then make sure that one of those groups of 3s has another plant somewhere else within proximity but separated. That ties it all together. Really important is to make sure that you water after planting. This just helps the soil kind of sit in around the roots. You may need to even top up some soil after that, and then keep them watered in the next few days. Don't let them dry out, because that's the best way for the roots to get into the soil.
The third tip is to check how much space a plant needs around it. And we used the Royal Horticultural Society website to check how big a plant would grow and how much space we needed to leave. I guess in that vein, obviously, don't judge a plant by its cover. What looks small can turn into a monster. So just plant on predicted size, not what comes in the pot. And don't be disappointed, if they come rather small. Obviously, in time, it will grow.
Another rule of thumb is that larger plants should be planted in the back of your border and smaller plants in front. That seems pretty obvious, yet you need to think about larger plants in terms of volume, not just like the size in the pot.
volume and height as well, I suppose, right?
Yeah, and you kind of want your border to cascade downwards into the open space.
Another tip on that, if you're planting close to a border, like I'm going to show you here near the rock wall, plant plants that will hopefully spill over that border, right? That will cascade over it to create that beautiful effect.
Yeah. I guess another tip is just, listen, some of your plants are going to die. The good thing about it is you can always pull it up and plant something else. Or if you planted something and you don't like it, you can pull it up and plant something else in its place. Just have fun with it.
Yeah, mistakes are not permanent.
But unless you're doing hardscaping, and then it really will cost you.
And finally, we just want to say be patient. You know, a garden takes time to come into its own. What we planted now looks a little bit
sparse and weak.
But I think in time it's going to really grow and be beautiful and lush and rich, but it's going to take some time. That's, the teething pains of starting a garden from scratch.
Yeah, they say about 2 years.
2 years.
2 years until you start seeing the fruits of your efforts.
Amazing. Alright, that's the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching episode 15, and next week I have a very, very anticipated video, which is going to be the grand reveal of our garden transformation. Promise you there are a few surprises that we have still left and not shown you. Also, I think the impact is going to be much greater when you see what the garden used to look like, or when you get a reminder of what the garden used to look like. So thanks for being here, and I'll catch you next week. Bye!